What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to Split Screen D&D, the place where we are attacking all things Dungeons and Dragons from both sides of the screen. Ooh, that was
a good one.
That was a very bard-like riff there.
The greatest class
I must
of all
say,
time.
and I meant that as an insult, but no, actually, I was loving it. My name's Tom Quinn, resident dungeon master here at Modern Myth,
And I'm Josh Winans, resident player character here at Modern Myth.
and we're going to dive right into this one. It's going to be an interesting topic today.
I'm going to stop you right there.
Oh.
Hey, Internet, how's it going? You know, you're looking good today. And just want to say we really appreciate all the fine things you've been doing for us. Man, we gotten some subscribers. We're getting comments. Things are popping off a bit.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
Especially on the comments front. Thank you guys so much for starting to engage in that space. We've seen so much love, so much interesting insights and thoughts about, people's own perspectives on the topics.
Awesome stuff.
I love hearing it. It's great to be able to take that stuff and pull it into future conversations like
yep,
these.
we steal your ideas, so thank you.
Yeah, oh yeah, thank you. But yeah, to be able to implement at our own tables, seen some awesome support from the old school community, which was great. It really has been awesome. So thank you guys so much for
But
that.
if you haven't, or just joining us for the first time, a like is super appreciated. The comments, as he's saying, amazing. Subscribe so you can always tell when our videos are coming up, and hit that little notification bell. I actually don't know what that does. Does it notify? I assume it notifies you, but
it notifies you.
that is fantastic. So you should click that too.
It notifies you, and you're gonna want to get notified about this one because it's gonna be an interesting topic. I have been thinking a lot lately, mainly because
That's dangerous.
I know it's especially over here. As I've been doing post-production on Rakish Rovers, and there will be times where exchanges will occur, and I'll be playing them back, and I'll find myself playing them back 2 or 3 times over. Exchanges that I thought carried a lot of weight, or were sometimes I can't even quite put my finger on it, but it got me thinking about how we at the table, both DMs and players, can be intentional in the way that we harness emotion to enhance our communication at the table. I know that's a bit of a mouthful, but the long and short of it is today's topic is how can we wield emotion at the table, much as in combat we would be wielding any manner of loadout.
Like emotions are the powers of the social pillar.
They are to a greater or lesser extent, and I know I'm gonna be blindsiding you a little bit by just kind of tossing the subject over to you. But
yay,
I think the main reason I kind of want to start over there is because I really think that, and my evidence for this is in like I was saying, in post-production, going through and watching so many of those interactions. Sometimes it's a player and an NPC, but so many of those interactions are intra-party. It's 2 player characters having an exchange that carries a certain amount of weight. And increasingly, I am convinced that if that's happening by accident, you can hedge your bets towards having more frequent, potent exchanges, just based on being a little bit more cognizant of what emotions you're tethering to or assigning to the communication you're having at the table.
Yeah. So you're talking about using emotions for interpersonal.
Yeah. So I right out of the gate, I'm just curious to get your thoughts on. I guess here's a good question.
Okay.
And I think this can kind of be divided into 2 spaces.
Okay.
Just much as on the DM side, I might be doing substantial amount of prep pre-session, and there's things that I'm fully prepared for, and there's things that I'm going to have to improv a lot more in that space.
Okay.
I think player interactions, maybe to a lesser degree, but still fall in these 2 categories.
Right.
Many of the things you're doing at the table, obviously, you're fully reactionary. You are improving your way through the game world.
Right.
But absolutely, certainly as a DM, as a player, there are times where you realize that an important reunion is on the horizon. a difficult conversation with a friend is on the horizon. And these are moments that I think no doubt players prepare for to some extent.
Yeah, 100%.
You obviously
we'll
don't
talk
know how
about
the
that.
other person's going to respond, and you don't have control over.
That's the big thing.
But you do have control of the emotion in which you instantiate that conversation, and that's a big deal. I think a bigger deal than we give it credit for if we're not being conscious of that process.
So, goodness. So preparing for a possibly emotional interaction. I've been on both sides. I've been on sides where I just whatever. And this is more the beer and pizza days.
Yeah.
Where we just like rolled, and man, I just had a blast, just
Yeah.
like rolling off the cuff. But it wasn't a serious game, so it didn't really matter much.
Right.
And I won't go so far as to say we utilized emotions to bring about interesting stories. If we used emotions at all, it was more to be funny.
Right.
And
I do think actually that's probably one of the major differentiators between Rakish Rovers, which has been a far more serious enterprise.
Despite what you may think if you're watching right now, don't trust us. It gets serious.
Don't worry, it'll get there. But I think probably a big part of that is simply the fact that has been a backbone of all of the interactions in the game. Is you guys have been more conscious, certainly than the 4E beer and pizza days, of what emotional communication is transpiring at the table. So I guess let's say you and Katerina have you've got a bone to pick with Katerina.
Never happened before, but let's just pretend.
Let's go back to like say level 2, level.
Where I literally stabbed her. Yeah, let's just pretend back those levels.
So, I guess I'm curious, how conscious were you of where the conflict in that relationship was going to go, and how much were you in control in deciding that process versus how much were you kind of in that reactionary improv space as that was playing out?
Absolutely. So, gosh, there's so many things to unpack there.
I know. Again, I knew this was going to be a bit of a.
So we could like spend the whole episode talk just about that. But when that interaction happened, it was a lot of reactionary things. And in that point, we were just beginning to experiment with getting more immersed. So I had a harder time separating myself from my character.
I love that you're touching on it. Keep going, but I love
so, which I think is really important to be able to do. Just for enjoyment of the game's sake more than anything. But like I became legitimately upset at the way that our interactions went. Did I guess they make it more realistic? Maybe, but the trade-off there is how I viewed Amanda outside of the table was being influenced by the game in a negative way.
Gotcha.
And I was like, no.
Yeah, and I know you. I mean, you voiced concerns about some of those exchanges, and I don't think certainly this conversation is not meant to advocate for going full method actor.
Oh, good.
Being like,
and I guess maybe if that's your thing, but if you are, I'm assuming you're actually a actor who is like sharpening their skills, and more power to you. That'd be an interesting, like all like Robert De Niro's and who was method actors? Dustin Hoffman.
I think Heath Ledger was one.
Rip,
There's been a lot of. I think a lot of the Jokers.
About a lot of the Jokers. Yeah, a lot of them, except for Joaquin Phoenix, who absolutely killed it. He's like, I never went that deep into it, and he did fantastic as the Joker. Anyway, hey, we just went in the weeds again. But one thing also, going back into the topic, just swerving back in the lane, is thinking about it outside of the game. Through that experience, I learned, for me personally, it's not good to decide the emotion or think about it too much.
Okay.
Couple reasons. One, if you're considering game time and you time, you might spend a week or 2 weeks away from the table where you are stewing and you're going back over every little detail. And suddenly you come back totally different than what you left off, because you've had a week or 2 weeks to think about it.
Gotcha.
So it kind
Yeah,
of
I could see being over invested in that process. It could even backfire.
it happened to me a lot.
Okay.
Where especially when I was super emotional in that time. Man, I sound like I'm all emo. I don't think it was that bad, but
I mean, your hair was black at the time, and
covered one
you
eye.
had it grown out a little, and
That's because I don't want you to see the tears that run.
down the single eye.
Single eye. It's hard to get the single eye. Not
blurry
many people
eyeliner.
understand how hard it is, but you
cry out
can
of
do
this.
it. But what I found successful more was kind of just take stock of where I was in that moment and just decide what my mindset was.
Okay.
So am I upset? Like on a scale of 1 to 10, how upset I am? Why am I upset? And boom, I don't touch it again until like right before I remind myself, okay, this is my mindset as I left the table. And
Gotcha,
that's been a lot better. It can't like going in red hot on emotions can be interesting, but if it's all the time, it's draining.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah. Yeah, and I think probably, there are so many interactions that take place at the table that don't require really any of the stoppers. You walk in to deal with a shopkeep, unless I'm running a shopkeep whose family was just murdered and I'm imploring you to do something about it, probably those interactions are unbound. But I would say, actually, I guess in the context of assigning emotion to your communication, to some degree, even though the importance goes way down in those, it's still important, because if you walk in and you've assigned anger, like you just go, you know what? I'm gonna be a total dick to this shopkeep. Like,
right.
I mean, presumably you're gonna be angry, or you're going to be
what's the
accusatory or suspicious or whatever you're going to.
What's that traditional? The elf hates the dwarf.
Oh, yeah.
Elf walks in, it's a dwarf blacksmith, and then they're automatically going to be salty towards each other.
Right. And so I think that in the context of, I guess, thinking about emotion as a tool to be utilized.
Yes.
I think the general interaction we have at the table with emotion from an RP standpoint is it steers our RP. And
just like real life.
Yeah. But I think that's maybe the delineation, is this isn't real life.
Right.
And whereas in real life, there's not an extrapolation of Josh and Kel. There's just Josh. So if someone pisses off Josh, there's no one pulling the strings back there who can actually analyze that. And so what I would put forth into the conversation, and I guess to everyone at home, is that the whole spectrum of emotions are a toolkit that is sitting in front of you at all times while you're RPing, and that we should be striving to take an active role in selecting those. Not always. Again, there are absolutely times where you don't, your character, someone you just found out, bad guy XYZ killed your father. Okay. Do you really need to be selective about which I mean, there's
no, for sure.
But I will say the interaction, let's say for instance, let's just run with that example. You just found out something horrible. It can be whatever, but you just found out something devastating to your character. Okay. And in the spirit of the intra-party space, one of your companions comes over and goes, "Hey, how are you doing? Like, are you doing all right?" Now here's a perfect example. Yes. You could respond with anger, you could respond with fear, you could respond with sadness, you could respond with, and those are at your disposal. And how you respond, which of those emotions you grab out of the toolbox and respond with, changes that interaction dramatically. You might be enraged
I see what you're
at
saying.
the bad guy, but you have all the choices in the world with how you're interacting, because you're telling a story about your character in those moments. And so you have the option to, is that moment for Kel one in which we can sympathize and we are mourn alongside him?
Mhm.
Is it one in which we have to recoil a little bit because he's so angry? Is it one, and that's kind of the space that I'm talking about, where you are able to
Right.
take these. I'm going to use a visual example because
Right.
moving forward, I think it'll be helpful.
Yeah.
Is each of those emotions, if you envision them as a color,
Right.
you can begin painting the scene that is kind of
Yep.
unfolding around you
Gotcha.
with a certain tone, a certain shade. And so talk with me a little bit about, I guess, that space. Is that a space that you generally feel like you have a lot of control and you're consciously making those decisions? Or
No, in the moment, definitely not. I think we've talked, like, I hate the phrase, that's what my character would do, because it excuses a lot of asshole.
DMs also hate the phrase.
Yeah, but I think in this case, it's really applicable. That you put on the mantle of your character and you just try to act organically to what's happening around you.
Absolutely.
But knowing what you're using the example of colors.
Yeah.
So like Kel has a certain palette that he usually paints with.
Yes.
So
This is exactly where I wanted to get.
Oh,
So yeah.
yes, I did something good. Yeah. Anyway,
You
so
can come back next week.
I know. You're welcome, Marinette. See you later. But so Kel, for example, anger it's getting less, but especially younger Kel.
It certainly was a major.
That was mostly anger. And then when it wasn't anger, it was almost like withdrawn. Especially when he had his episodes, he was just totally different.
And I would say those episodes, likely fear would be the closest thing. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to put words.
Yeah,
in your
no,
mouth,
I think fear. He would shut down. So yeah. There wasn't a lot of in between. Not a lot of sad. Wasn't very vulnerable. Not a lot of grief, even, which you could easily paint there. But it was mostly anger. But as he has matured and he's walked the paladin path, there's a lot more palettes of colors available. So I just tried. That might be I call it mindset, but just knowing how your character would normally react. I wouldn't go so far as like, if someone asks me, "How are you today?" I would know exactly what emotion I want to counter with, but just be like, this is usually how my character would act.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I'm just thinking that as a player at the table, you are one of a multitude of storytellers.
Oh, that brings up so I paint with red, but here comes Aster, who's bringing in a yellow. What does it do to my red now that I've been countered with yellow?
Yeah, certainly there's the interaction or it gets a lot more complicated as you begin having those interactions,
just like real life.
So I guess kind of like you're talking about, that Kel's palette has broadened.
Yes,
but we being the rest of the table can only understand that through Kel's outward communication and which of those colors he chooses to paint with.
Right.
And so let's say that even though you said, well, he's maturing but let's say every interaction you're still painting with red. We don't have any way of knowing that.
Right.
So to some extent, I think that does speak to this idea that as you are conscious of this, let's call it just maturing of the character, and just development of the character in general. I think too, you have with Katarina and Aster and Reek for the duration of the time that he was. Reek.
Thanks for killing him. I really appreciate it.
That I think that was your the closest thing Cal experienced the sadness, which is not to correlate that with sadness, but
yeah, he almost shed a tear, almost did.
But it, I think that knowing that you are presumably wanting to tell a story about a character who is growing, who is changing, who is painting with new colors as the story progresses, that you're gonna have to make conscious decisions to
paint with those
dab
colors.
onto that palette.
Absolutely.
And that I think really, I'm glad we got into the paint, because I think it really is an easier way of talking about this. I mean, talking about emotion is such a intangible thing.
Right.
Somehow color more so, especially for a colorblind person.
I was going to bring that up. Yay, I'm colorblind.
Put colorblind in the comments for a chance to win a hand-colored picture by Josh Winans. We're just gonna print him a black and white sheet, all in gray tones.
I mean, I can't. So I'll just be like a smiley face, man. I can't.
There you go.
I can't
You're
draw.
good. You're good. You're good. But no, so I think so that, I guess, is that process, the process of acknowledging that your character has a certain palette of colors in which they generally engage with the world in. That I would say it's actually fair to say that any character who's moving through an arc and growing, definitionally that palette has to either change or expand.
I feel like
I mean, I'm literally rattling this off the top of my head. So
right.
I'm sure someone in the comments is going to go like, well, what about this character? And I'll
right.
go, actually, you're right. That's a perfect counter to what I just said. But
yeah, but character development you usually see. I'm trying to think of like classical, like really people in movies or works of fiction that you identify with that don't go through some sort of journey where they do change their emotional palette.
Yes, and that's it. That's the phrasing. Their emotional palette, I think, definitionally, in the same way that with Kel, it was a kind of starting out the campaign, this very hard-nosed, effectively still a soldier, even having been broken, even having all that. Now, I think, for instance, there was a good period of time as a soldier where the whatever color you would paint fear with, what had become so depleted, like there really wasn't much to work with there.
Right.
The drow, so there wasn't an active choice in gaining that as part of your palette, and that's a really cool aspect of character development too.
I like that.
Is someone can impart
an event or a person.
Yeah, I mean, you look at like a vicious dog. Good chance that dog wasn't born. He didn't come out the womb just ready to tear someone's arm off. You know.
Right.
So I think that. So it can be an external thing, and that really ties into the intra-party side of things. And not so much in the long. I mean, certainly in the long term, but like we were talking about, that example of someone comes to clearly maybe console you, realizing that you're hurting.
Right.
And if you were to turn around with a big load of red paint, and just go like, "What the fuck do you know about it? You've never lost anything." Just anger,
transference.
Yeah. And then to have them, the natural response, I think generally is that gets ratcheted up. Now maybe they're painting with something closer to red than they would have, but it's amazing how disarming it can be to have someone respond with a color that is so complementary. And I'm going to use complementary in the if you were painting with red well, yeah, I'm going to scratch that analogy. But I think that in real time, kind of when you're improving through interactions, and realizing that, like, again, that would be a moment where that return home where hey, I'm going to be reunited with my father finally. Only to get there and find out that your father was murdered by bad guy XYZ, and you've been right on his heels, and now you've probably been giving some thought to that reunion. You probably weren't anticipating this being it. But now you're in that space where there's this exchange going on, and you're back fully in improv mode, and you're kind of in a sparring with color.
It's fun to think of it like that.
Space, where if you're intent on departing from that interaction, having had no reconciliation, you can absolutely do that. All you do is keep painting with red. You don't, as long as you don't change your palette, there's no amount of me going like, like, whoa, easy, man. I didn't mean anything. And you go like, the fuck, you didn't mean anything about, I mean, you could just keep on coming. And eventually I just have to go, there's no color that I can paint that's going to change this scene. And I'll exit stage left.
So I'm going to run with this analogy because I really like this.
Of all the analogies, a color analogy.
I know. Well, we can use number. Oh no, color works well. So let's say would you say if like maybe a good idea is to have the mindset of when with interpersonal stuff, like say when I have all these palettes, the color in my palette, but when I interact with Aster, it's primarily yellow. And when I interact primarily with Cat, it's primarily blue.
Absolutely. I absolutely think that that switching that occurs if you're interacting with the guy who killed your dad,
Probably red,
it's
right?
yeah, I mean, and justifiably so. And that's the other thing is this is not to say, hey, you should be neutering your emotional responses.
Right.
It's not that at all. It's just you should be cognizant of why.
Mhm.
And another thing is also we've been talking about color in terms of the various tones that we could be imparting.
Mhm.
Another aspect of this conversation is the saturation or the intensity of those colors.
Right.
Because if you turn around and go like, now's not the time. I promise you, don't just fucking leave me alone right now.
Right.
And I go, all right, man, my bad. And I turn a step away. That's very different than you turning around and laying every qualm you have with me. So
Yeah.
and that's a more intense, a higher saturation red. And I think. I've talked about it in DM and the PM is this idea of contrast.
Hey, you should check that out, by the way.
You should definitely check it out. That's how quick the plug.
Shameless plug.
But it applies to so many aspects. Is when we as a table are interacting with Kel or experiencing Kel's interactions.
Yeah.
If those interactions are too monochromatic, we begin to think we know. We don't need you to interact. We know you're going to be pissed about this. We know you're going to be,
that's
we know
boring and predictable, and which would probably lead to less interactions. It doesn't matter. It could be anger. It could be sad. It could be joy. It could be anything.
Right. And I think it's because it speaks to stagnation. It speaks to that lack of growth. And it's something that I think that we've seen definitely as the Rovers have been going on. As you have become more and more comfortable with your party members, with your companions, the outer shell that really kind of barred Kel as a human being from interacting with the world and kind of said, Kel the soldier, Kel the broken slave, this is the way he interacts with the world. And slowly over time, the actual Kel kind of began adding his own colors to that palette. And that really, I think, changed the dynamic of how we view that character.
Right. What do you think about this idea? So let's say we're using the color analogy, continuing, having interaction with Aster. So I come in with yellow. She comes in with blue. Well, yellow and blue make a color. I don't know.
Green.
Thanks.
Green would be the color they tend to make. Or for you, a generally muddy brown.
Yeah, muddy brown. They make a muddy brown. And then you walk away now that instead of being a yellow and green, like instead of just being yellow, it's more of a browny yellow.
Absolutely.
And that's maybe a way to think of how your relationship evolves. Each time you have an interaction, it changes the color palette.
Yeah, I think that's probably true for real life. I mean,
I think so.
In the sense that
I think we're more kinder, we're more easier to forgive, and able to think longer term. Like, hey, if I'm having a bad day, you're like, dude, all right, cool, you're being a dick right now, but usually you're an okay guy that I don't want to stab.
Well, I think the level of maturity that speaks to is like, I mean, there's times where you're not as pleasant with your friends as you'd like to be. There's times where, but you're friends, and everyone gets that people are having bad days, and people are, that's part of the complexity of being emotional beings, and that same complexity should play out at the table. There absolutely should be times where Kel says or does something that they go, I know that he's hurting right now, and I know he didn't mean what he said there.
We're treating this almost like too much like real life. I'm glad you brought that up, because in D&D or any tabletop that you're playing, you're probably not like working a mundane job. And then
no doubt.
You're fighting effing dragons. You are put into insanely stressful situations where things are ramped up to 11.
Right.
So you're probably going to get a lot more stronger emotions. Probably.
No, I think what transpires at the table, presumably the saturation is ratcheted. I mean, from day to day. Okay, maybe you came home, maybe you had a bad day, maybe you're upset.
Right.
That's a different upset than finding out your dad, who you thought you were going to meet today, was murdered by a guy that you've.
I don't know. When I have a
you know,
bad day, I just start like throwing things, and
just
break
smashing
things.
everything.
I've gone through so many TVs.
I'm just dial up my dad. You're dead to me now. It's
It's
I don't
healthy.
even, I don't even. I
I
don't
think
even
that's
know
healthy.
why. I don't even know
I think
why.
that's a good way to live your life. I
yeah.
don't know.
No, but no, I think you're right. But it's the cool thing is I think the more cognizant we are of the colors and we can say with the color analogy, the colors or the emotion that we are tethering to the communication that we're having at the table.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's like any tool set. Like you can be a finger painter with those, or you can be a fucking Rembrandt. And what I'm advocating for is the more cognizant you are. I mean, you don't become Michelangelo by just going like keep on dabbing your fingers. You have to refine the way in which you interact with that palette.
That's really true. Because there are times when I've made decisions on emotional, like one of the I'm like, it would be interesting if Kel acted this way. It'd be interesting. Like I like stirring the pot a little bit sometimes, and that's not how I would act or like anything. But it's just kind of fun to see how that changes things. Yeah, for sure, man.
Yeah, and so I think the I guess the long and short from my side now.
Yeah, we want to get on the DM side because we've been talking quite a bit about.
Well,
that.
yeah, and I think that virtually anything that we can say on the player side translates to the DM side.
I'm going to argue with you on that. I'm thinking about this.
I'm ready to hear it. What is it that you're finding?
I'm going to pose this to you.
You're wrong. Let's move on.
Well, it's just like playing the game.
I'm having flashbacks to being at the table.
So because PCs we're playing long form, so we have to things change and evolve over time. What do you think about this statement? I think that DMs with their NPCs and their characters need to ratchet things up to a higher level off the bat.
I would say, I mean, given the duration in which I guess I would. This is not to counter that. I think it's actually just kind of a refinement of that thought process.
Yeah.
Is if I ratchet someone up, that if you walk into a tavern, and you look around and you go, there is a massive splotch of blue paint in that corner over there.
Yes.
Maybe you're going to go check that out. If that's a guy weeping into his hands, like, I mean, you see 6 steins, spilled over, and he is just devastated.
Right.
That's me ratcheting it up. I'm painting with a big brush, and I'm painting with high intensity.
Yeah, okay. So I need to refine it. You're right.
Well, but that all that is to say is that the more I ratchet it up, I think the more likely whatever the epicenter of that emotion is becomes a bigger part of the narrative for that space.
Okay.
Because, I mean, if there's a guy who's in the corner who I know is really, really morose, he, whatever, his whole family was eaten by a monster that has taken him. I know, it's like,
grow up.
That's every villager in every town we've ever been to.
What? Something weird? No, whatever.
But this guy, but if he's not expressing that, and so here's another, I guess, example of the way in which, from a DM side, I really think that we take that brush and we go, there's a guy over here, okay? And he could just be a guy over there. And there are many people who have, in real life, who have suffered horrible tragedies, who if you walked into a room, you wouldn't be able to point at them and be like, that guy is suffering a horrible tragedy.
Okay.
They just keep their shit together and they go about their business,
But then we don't know that guy went through horrible shit. And if that's what refining it is, I feel like DMs, you need to make NPCs or some memorable.
Oh, certainly.
And emotions is one maybe very interesting way to make a character memorable.
Yeah. Well, again, I would say anyone having a powerful emotional response to anything is more interesting and is going to draw the party's attention than someone who is cleaning the bar top and just hanging out.
Right.
So the guy in the corner who is devastated, that's clearly, I mean, again, anyone who's played the game even one time, probably if you've never played the game, if you've never even heard of Dungeons and Dragons, but you're just envisioning walking into a tavern
Right.
and there's a guy who is flagrantly drunk and weeping into his hands clasped over his face, you probably have an idea like something's going on with that guy. And if you are a hero who deals with bad things, who
Right.
deals with problems, who solves problems, that's probably somewhere where you go, hey, what's going on, bud?
Right.
Like, can I
Yeah,
buy
that's-
you another drink?
That's
Or-
dangling the hook, pretty, yeah, that's pretty obvious there.
But I think you're right. An emotional response is certainly one of the lures that we have. Again, you walk in, we just talked about a shopkeep.
Okay.
You walk into a shopkeep, probably that's a super mundane interaction. You need to buy something, he provides it to you. But if when you walk in, that shopkeep is, the whole shop is painted red.
Right.
And he is railing on the stock boy. You can see stock boy's covered in welts and bruises and
Jesus.
that's emotionally, that's a totally different scene, and probably you guys are beginning to dab your brushes into your own colors.
What would I see
in response to that?
I'll be like, yeah, that's what you do.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a stock. Boy,
It's his fault.
It's he should have done whatever he was doing better.
Do it better, please.
No, but so I mean, it is a good example, and I think you nailed it on the head that that utilizing emotion as because if I don't, I'm just banking on the fact that you're going to go like, if I just go like, oh yeah, a neatly dressed stock boy is stocking one of the shelves in the back as you enter. If I've got a whole little adventure hook tied to this,
yeah.
and I go like, oh, please let them ask the shop boy if he's regularly abused. Like
there's a chance.
and the thing is, there is a chance. Absolutely. I mean, if someone started talking to the shop boy, if someone just interacted with him, the likelihood though that a random shop boy who's stocking shelves is going to draw the attention of the party.
Well, it could be something
relatively low,
simple as like you ask the shopkeeper, hey man, you got any healing potions? And he could say like, boy, get the healing potions, and you notice the boy flinch. Boom.
Absolutely. And that's the beauty is it's a good representation of how certainly there's been an emotional communication there.
Yep.
With virtually nothing said. Like he could even go, boy, that's
Ooh,
it. Just
nonverbal communication with emotion. That's a whole.
I think that is
that's the next level.
We're getting into the Picasso or the Michelangelo. That the space in which you are painting with.
I need to get more into that, man.
Well, definitely, I think it's something to think about. And one of the interactions I mentioned this to you the other day that Aster had with Fillion in episode 1 of the Rovers, where she's talking with him. Something that I think is really
Fillion is
the surgeon / generally helmsman.
Thank you.
The
guy who pees forever.
He did pee a lot. I'm glad that's what you. That's
what I plucked away from Fillion.
I've got my notes here. Fillion pees sometimes, but that's the thing is, and I have actually found this to be there. There are times where you'll have. It could be intra-party. It could be a party member with an NPC. There are times in which a line of inquiry is moving forward that is not an inquiry that the NPC is comfortable with, that another player character is comfortable with. The power of not answering a question, the power of deflecting, the power of still provides all of the emotional communication with none of the verbal. And in that exchange, Aster is basically saying, you were a surgeon during the war. What side were you on?
Right.
And she's kind of picking at this, and he basically is going like, that's all behind us. That's and just before you guys spot the enemy vessel, which kind of changes the whole tone of the scene, she says like, I'm not judging, I'm an Easterner too. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
And he says like, I think our watch is getting late. Like we should.
Yeah.
But I think in that exchange, despite the fact he answered none of her questions, none of them, but there was a tremendous amount of emotional communication taking place between her and him with regard to like there's a ton of room for you to infer
Mm-hmm.
precisely what his
Right.
world was prior to this.
Yeah, we don't know the side he's on, but we know something happened that was hard for him to deal with.
Right. And in many cases, I think that's more potently communicated
Mm-hmm.
by refusing communication.
But now we're curious, right? Now we want to know.
Right. But the interesting thing is you're also in a place where, because there's a certain social decorum. I mean, in real life,
Yeah.
if you went like, hey man, you seemed a little bit down earlier,
Right.
everything okay?
Right.
And the person goes like, yeah, man, it's cool. It's all good. And they get up and leave.
Right.
You're curious. You might try to find some way of engaging again on the subject.
Right.
But you also know that there is a line that you can cross at which you're not painting with the sympathetic or empathetic brush anymore. You're now, you're beginning to badger someone, and that's this all speaks to how complex emotion is with regard to communication.
Right.
But the beauty is by being able to say, again, let's say, I think even early on there wasn't any direct, there was eventually direct engagement about Kel's scars.
Oh yeah.
And I remember, especially early on, like you went to great efforts to ensure that no one saw the extent of what had been done to you.
Right.
And there was, I think specifically with Katerina, it was one of a really endearing engagement with Katerina. It was kind of, you guys had a very interesting relationship early on.
Her scar.
Right. But there was still all of the questions because it wasn't divulged exactly how it took place. It was exactly that kind of point I was outlining, is she kind of inquired, and you basically said like, don't worry about it, kind of put your
right.
And she and in that emotional palette, she could have gone, I'm going to put my brush away now.
Yeah.
Or she could have gone like, we're teammates. Like, what the fuck do you mean you're not going to tell? Like, if something's going on with you, I need to know about it. She could have painted with that brush.
Right.
But the brush she chose to pull out was to go, you're not the only one with scars.
Right.
And again, what a different ending to that interaction.
Yeah.
Than if she had just put her brush away.
Man.
Than if she had opted to be upset that you were keeping something from her.
Yeah, the interactions between Kat and Kel have been very interesting, because it started off so heated and it's turned into a little bit of a romance.
Well, and I think even that was during the time in which you guys were still a little bit.
That was one of the first olive branches I think that came across.
So I again, it's everything I think that we've said so far, I think applies on the DM side. I don't disagree with you that we maybe have to be a little more aggressive sometimes, because we literally are trying to grab the party's attention.
That's what I think it is emotion can be in a great
attractant.
Yeah,
absolutely. But with that said, I mean, the biggest thing, and this again for DMs and players alike, that the reason that this jumped in my head is because, like I said, I have been repeatedly kind of taken aback by how this spans all the way back to our very first technical shoot that we did on the Rovers, which is a very heavy
oh
episode.
My gosh, yeah.
And that episode was heavy. I mean, there were entire sections of that shoot that were painted the deepest sadness. That can be painted. There were sections that were painted in anger, in remorse, it was so emotionally laden. And ever since then, since that was really where I got to start reviewing, the interactions that were taking place, it's been on my mind that this is a hugely potent element. And I don't think it's reasonable to just say, well, emotion is just born out of that improv. It runs adjacent to, and that is not to say we have absolute control. We're not Spock. We are in some cases, it's totally reasonable that at the table we are victims of our own emotion. But there are many times in which instead of it being a blunt cudgel that we're swinging around wildly,
right.
It could be a sharpened blade. It could be a pen. It could be it could be whatever you want it to be. If you begin engaging with it and choosing to use it as a tool at your tables.
I'm gonna. I agree, 100%. I'm gonna throw out some caution that when you start to overanalyze yourself, it can hurt a lot.
No
don't
doubt.
force yourself to like, I'm now going to do this, and this is, I letting things happen organically. And you might find that we always talk that improv is a skill, it's a sharpened thing. That maybe using emotion in this is a sharpened skill, and that give yourself some time to grow into it.
Yeah, I think that is a big takeaway is like your character, likely is starting out with a box of crayons, and they probably got the 8 count.
Yeah,
right out of the gate. I mean, maybe not. Maybe they're a very emotionally complex character right out of the gate. But however many crayons you have at your disposal, if every time something comes down the pipeline, you just flip that box open, grab for whichever one seems most expedient, and start coloring, start painting, that's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, because I think there are a huge number of people in real life, and there's certainly a huge number of characters. It's not, which wouldn't read as unreasonable to react compulsively and emotionally in the situations they're in. But I think as the longer we're sitting at the table, from campaign to campaign, from session to session, and the more we want to be sophisticated with those colors, Bob Ross doesn't ever use a stock color. He's got to mix a little burnt
titanium
ivory
white,
with a little titanium white. If you're gonna paint a happy tree, you're just, I should say, some snow onto that happy tree. You're never gonna use just titanium white. That ain't gonna look right. You got to get a little. But that's, and I think that's the paint thing. I'm glad that we kind of stumbled into that space.
I think that's a great analogy.
I think the more you think about the colors your character is comfortable painting with, or for a DM, the NPC, and this really applies. I think this really applies to major NPCs, major villains. You maybe aren't giving the same thought process to the guy who's going to sell them rope.
Yeah. So sometimes
characters can put them in that spot for sure. I mean,
but I like shopkeepers that are interesting, and emotion is one way to make a character interesting. There's lots of ways, but I forget channel XP to 3. What is it? Yeah. He analyzed Matt Mercer, and I think he said one of the most amazing things Matt Mercer does is he makes his shopkeepers interesting. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're absolutely right. And I think you can transfer that to all NPCs that you want to make meaningful in your campaign. But like, don't be afraid to give your shopkeeper a weird like every time you're like, hey, can you make me a broadsword? Little did you know, like broadswords are his trigger word. His
whole family was killed by a broadsword. He doesn't hold the warlord accountable.
It's a broadsword.
It was that damn broadsword.
Oh, here's this for a character. This came up to me. The beginning of every day, you roll a d12 or whatever. Okay. And you have to roll the emotion you roll for that. Like 1 is happy, 2 is...
Ooh, he's like a poly emote kind of
something weird, like he's cursed or something.
I guess that wouldn't even be Paul. It would be like a unit emote, but like on a that would be an interesting.
Would that be an interesting character?
It'd actually make for a really cool magic item.
Ooh, that would.
A hat that does something for you or whatever.
Right, gives you a pretty significant boon.
Every day
and your party members like take off the freaking
hat. Take the hat off. Yeah, it has to be something that like barely justifies its existence.
I know, right?
So the party's getting increasing, and at some point, like the hat goes into the fire.
Well, no, I'm saying like it's a +2 to AC.
I know you'd love that. I know you'd
give me something that gives me plus to AC, you asshole.
But the problem is it would be a deal. I mean, like I said, I think it ends up being a really interesting magic item for sure.
Yeah.
The problem is you're having a meaningful interaction with Katarina, and you're on a red day.
This would have to be a either like a more of a joking, more relaxed,
or you'd have to take the hat off and just get rid of the +2.
It'd have to be when you put it. You have to put it on at the beginning of the day, and it has to stay on the whole day.
I think it's cursed. I think in order to take it off, you're going to need to
decurse it,
remove curse, or maybe a greater restoration can do it, something like that.
Well, I got lesser restoration as a paladin. Does that work?
That's some bitch shit.
I'm fuck you, Jim. Anyway,
no, I think again, this was a topic I knew wading into was going to be really hard to kind of pin down. But I do think, and I think there is so much more to be said on this. And what I love is because we've been seeing so much interaction in the comments. I'm really hoping that by no means do I think we came anywhere near filling in all the gaps on the conversation about emotion. But I would love to hear what other people are doing. Are they making conscious decisions about those interactions? Are they entirely, let's say, emotionally improving? And if so, how do you find the barrier between you as a player and you as a character? Because that, there's a lot of other things, accent, mannerisms, all these things, very easy to separate.
Yeah.
Emotion is not an easy thing to separate from an improv.
I guess another word of caution, is, always throw these out there, is make sure that you don't take the enjoyment away from the other people at the table. And nothing against like making someone feel uncomfortable a little bit, because that can be some really interesting things. But if someone's like, man, fuck that guy, like you might want to rethink what you're doing.
Yeah. I mean, I think that probably that's a fair disclaimer for virtually any conversation that we're having is if anything that you're like watching here leads you to go like, you know what, I am going to be a total dick the next time I'm at the table.
I don't know if you got the message. I don't think you heard what we were saying.
Maybe we did a really poor job of communicating.
Probably.
No, I think. It's hard to kind of put this one down because I know how broad it is. But I don't think it's, I'm hoping as we're rounding out here and as people are watching this and hopefully heading down to the comments to put their 2 cents, because like I said, there's way more unsaid than said given the scope of the episode. But I'm hoping that in those comments, at a minimum, people are thinking more about it. That's it. It's just something to go, because there's been times where I've been running a character and going like, I'm just shooting totally emotionally speaking off the cuff, and I think there are times where having a better directive on an emotional profile would provide a more definitive personality for a character, for so that's my 2 cents. I think that's about all I've got. Do you have
my parting words of wisdom? I love the palette analogy. Know what your character's palette is.
Yes, I really like that, knowing kind of what colors you generally operate in.
And maybe if you want to get more into it, like what colors you paint with the other players at your table. But I'm a big fan of the don't overthink it. Get into it with the so you can explore the space. I also think doing something interesting from time to time is also super fun.
Yeah.
But it's just another way to make the game more immersive, interesting. As long as it's not ridiculous, I think it's a positive. And goodness, I'm sure there's an amazing amount of people who've used emotion poorly. I'm sure there's just horror story after horror story. But I think it's a fun element to play with.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a great tool in your toolbox, whether it's one you've been consciously engaging with or simply going with the flow. I mean, whatever suits your fancy, but I hope people are thinking about it as a tool at their disposal and wielding it as such. For this go out, you, sir, not having the ability to identify anything, just slapped the hat on. You just rolled an anger day, and you need to let these people know that
without spiking.
I was going to say keep in mind the. Actually, I'll tell you, I wish we had an actual die. I would actually have you roll for it.
We don't
but
have one.
hopefully without peeking out the feed.
So is the emotion just anger? Do you want to give me more specific?
No, it's you get one emotion for the day. You've got your hat on, and these are your best friends. You love these people. They're awesome. They're in the comments. They're subscribing. They're liking. They're hitting the notification bell. But you are just fucking angry today. Doesn't change the fact that the world is theirs.
The world is yours.